So we're still talking about the development of brain. In this section, we'll deal with the midbrain. In this section, we'll first see how the mesencephalon forms the adult brain structures. Mind you, the mesencephalon is the simplest and the most primitive when it comes to development of the brain. And finally, we'll see what adult components are derived from the mesencephalon and how that actually happens. So, the midbrain, it retains a cylindrical form, and its narrowed cavity, it forms a cerebral aqueduct of Sylvius, which is continuous below with the fourth ventricle and above with the third ventricle. So this is the cerebral aqueduct of Sylvius. Here you can see this is continuous above with the third ventricle and below with the fourth ventricle. And the cavity of the forebrain and the cavity of the midbrain forms the cerebral aqueduct of Sylvius. So, now anterior to the cerebral aqueduct, the basal laminae, they give rise to tegmentum and substantia nigra. So, the important structures that are formed anterior to the basal lamina, there are two important structures, the tegmentum and the substantia nigra. Here in the figure you can see this is the area of the midbrain. In this region lie the tegmentum and the substantia nigra. The marginal layer of each basal lamina, it enlarges and forms crus cerebri. So the marginal layer of each of the basal lamina, it enlarges and forms the crus cerebri. At the same time, the crura, they serve as pathways for nerve fibers which are descending from the cerebral cortex to the lower centers in pons, medulla, and the spinal cord. So the function of midbrain actually is to act as a relay center. What does the midbrain do? It is a relay center for all the information that is coming from the brainstem, then goes to the cerebral hemispheres, and from the cerebral hemispheres to again back to the brain stem. So the crura that were developed from the marginal layer of basal lamina, they serve as pathways for various nerve fibers. And what are these nerve fibers doing? These nerve fibers are descending from the cerebral cortex and to the lower centers in pons, medulla, and the spinal cord. So pons, medulla, and spinal cord, they're actually regulating the information that is coming from higher up brain centers, the information that has to be passed through the body so that the various bodily functions can be performed. Now, whenever a stimulus arrives in the environment, what happens is that stimulus prompts a response from the body. For example, I'm speaking, I'm looking at something or a pointy object. No, leave the pointy object aside. That's a reflex arc. That is a completely different story. So I'm looking at something, I'm trying to touch something, or I'm talking to something, or something comes into my view. So that information is processed, and that information is actually, that is a stimulus for the body. That stimulus is perceived by our sensory organs, either of the sensory organs or multiple of them. So these sensory organs act in unison and they send this information via the nerves to the brain. Now from first this information enters the brain stem. From the brain stem, this information passing through the midbrain enters the cerebral cortex. Now the midbrain, which is the relay center, is responsible for sending this information towards the correct channels. Now when this information has reached the cerebral cortex and has been processed, now the cerebral cortex sends off a signal so that one understands what he's saying or he's listening or whatever the stimulus may be. Now these signals are produced within the cerebral cortex. They are now carried by the motor nerves through the hindbrain. They pass through the midbrain. They pass to the hindbrain. There's modification in these signals via hindbrain. Some modifications are necessary, so there are modifications via hindbrain, and when the modifications have taken place, These modifications they are then sent off via peripheral nerves to the body so that the effector or the response to the stimulus can take place. So this is the function of the midbrain. So talking about midbrain, now the cells of the alar laminae, they invade the roof plate to form bilateral longitudinal elevations which are separated by a shallow midline groove. So again we are talking about the midbrain, this region in red. Now we're talking about the cells of the alar laminae. So the cells of the alar laminae, what are they doing? They're invading the roof plate. Now first they invade the roof plate. Now they form bilateral longitudinal elevations which are separated by a shallow midline groove. With further development, each elevation is subdivided by a transverse groove to form superior and inferior colliculus. So what happens? First of all, we had this alar lamina. The alar lamina formed a proliferation, or it invades the roof plate. Now, after invasion of roof plate, it forms separate elevations which are separated by a shallow midline groove. These elevations with development also develop a transverse groove. Now there are 4 elevations, 2 superior and 2 inferior. These elevations are known as colliculi, and these are the superior colliculi and the inferior colliculi. These 4 colliculi, they develop into the roof plate and lie dorsal to the aqueduct of the sylvius and form the tectum. So now in a developed brain, these 2 colliculi, they lie in the roof plate of the fourth ventricle, dorsal to the aqueduct of the sylvius, and they are responsible for the production of tectum. Again, a developmental concept that you need to understand and grasp. So this was all about this section. In this section, we saw the development of the midbrain. The development of midbrain is pretty simple when we compare it to the development of forebrain and hindbrain. That is because it is the most simple or most underdeveloped part of the brain. It actually acts as a relay center and is responsible for relay of information from hindbrain to forebrain and from forebrain to the hindbrain. I hope you like this section. For further such sections, keep watching sqadia.com.